Hi, my name is Jasmine Major,
I'm Sarah Smith.
Hi, I'm Deborah Perez.
and our topic is invasive animal species. Invasive animal species are a growing problem in the lower Galveston Bay Area region, and they typically have an impact on biotic as well as abiotic factors. They tend to compete with the native species, and they also tend to disturb ecosystem structure. And while all of our invasive species came from different geographic regions, they have all made their way into the greater Houston area. The lower Galveston Bay area is composed of marshes and prairies, and the blue tilapia and island apple snails tend to habitate in freshwater habitats like streams and bayous, while feral hogs and Muscovy ducks tend to settle down in the grassland habitats. Meanwhile, the Asian tiger mosquito flies around and spreads diseases such as the West Nile virus and the yellow fever. Sarah, what can you tell us about the feral hog?
So one of the main ways that the feral hog impacts its environment is through rooting or digging up the soil in search for food. Unfortunately, their rooting behavior severely damages ecosystems by destroying vegetation, disrupts soil chemistry, and that negatively impacts plant diversity in those areas. Rooting also allows an invasive plant species, the Chinese tallow, to successfully populate these already damaged areas, which furthers the impact. Finally, rooting destroys areas such as wetlands, springs, and creeks. They compete with livestock and native wildlife for food and resources, and they also carry diseases that can be spread to domestic pigs. So as far as the economic impact, they are one of the most destructive invasive species in the state of Texas, and they cause an estimated $500 million in damages every single year. About $50 million in damages are said to be just through agricultural damages alone. Their rooting behavior can destroy entire fields of crops, such as rice, wheat, soybeans, corn, etc. They're very indiscriminate eaters. They also destroy wildlife feeders, which are placed by hunters, usually for deer, and they often steal food intended for wildlife. They pose a very huge threat to the pork industry because the diseases that they carry can be transmitted to domestic pigs. Deborah, what can you tell us about the current research on the feral hog?
So because of the life-threatening diseases that the feral hogs can actually transmit to humans and other mammals like tuberculosis, the Texas Animal Health Commission has set strict regulations that before they are released into the wild, they must be tested and certified as disease-free. If one actually wants to stock up on feral hog, the restriction there is it must be only castrated males, so no reproduction, and they can be fatter and larger. There is actually no birth control methods to help control with the species. However, a fairly new method to help with the feral hog population has come out, and it is poison. It affects the blood's ability to send oxygen to the brain, therefore killing the organism. Pigs are highly susceptible to it just because, unlike humans and other mammals, they lack the enzyme that helps reverse the effect. Results are being shown, but however, the study can show and have some improvements for the future. So, what about the Muscovy duck, Sarah?
So the Muscovy duck also negatively impacts its environment, mostly by competing with the native species. They can become aggressive with other species of ducks. They may even fight with the male ducks of other species in an effort to mate with the female ducks. They carry diseases that can be passed on to native duck populations, such as duck viral enteritis, which can lead to the loss of biodiversity in areas where they're present. In populations that are very large, they obviously create a large amount of waste, referred to as droppings, and their droppings can negatively affect the water quality in areas where they live. They can also impact humans in recreational and residential areas in several ways. So the major economic impacts from the Muscovy duck include water contamination, damage to property, possible reduction in tourism and recreational visits in areas where they live. There's costs associated with their removal, and they can possibly lower real estate values in residential areas where they're present. As previously mentioned, the larger populations found near water bodies produce a large amount of waste, and that can negatively affect water quality, which has costs associated with it. If they're accustomed to being fed in parks or recreational areas, they can chase people and even bite children in an attempt to be fed. One Northwest Houston neighborhood's HOA actually spent about $13,000 to remove a population of 130 Muscovy ducks in their neighborhood. So, Deborah, what can you tell us about the research on Muscovy ducks?
So Muscovy ducks were actually an issue because they were discovered of being released recklessly and to have escaped captivity, leading them to overpowering the species in that ecosystem. So there's actually no active solution currently to control the species, but because the species is mainly found in the suburban and urban areas, programs need to be established that will discourage humans to actually feed the ducks. Owners of the Muscovy duck, or soon to be owners of the Muscovy ducks, are to be very responsible and have strict rules to follow by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services to never release their ducks into the wild because it is illegal. So Sarah, what's the ecological impact of the blue tilapia?
So, like our other species, the main impact from the blue tilapia is their competition with the native populations in the areas where they're present. The blue tilapia will compete with native populations for habitat space, for food, and also for spawning space. Because they compete for spawning space, they can reduce biodiversity and genetic variation in areas where they live because they will actually reproduce and hybridize with the native species of their ecosystems. They're also fond of digging, which disturbs the sediment and causes turbidity, which blocks out sunlight. This action just diminishes the amount of light available and negatively impacts organisms that rely on photosynthesis. The digging also kills largemouth bass fish eggs by disturbing the sediment where they're present, and the disturbance and then the subsequent settling of that sediment is what is said to kill the eggs. So the main economic impact of the blue tilapia has to do with the recreation and tourism industries here in the state of Texas. Specifically, they impact the recreational sport fishing area. Annually, sport fishing brings in over $4 billion in revenues in the state of Texas every single year. Not only does sport fishing support numerous jobs, but it also creates additional revenue from tourists who spend money on food, on lodging, and supplies while they're here in Texas. This also leads to additional local and state tax revenues, which benefits the residents of those areas. So because blue tilapia can suppress reproduction in sport fishes, such as largemouth bass and channel catfish, they have the potential to significantly reduce these revenues. Deborah, what is the current research on the blue?
It did come about because of the experimental studies, and although they show no human threat, they can significantly change the ecosystem because of their dense populations and the fact that they consume very large amounts of vegetation. For example, studies did show that the mussel population in Texas did significantly decrease due to the blue tilapia. So early detection is super important to prevent the population from increasing, and constant monitoring is key. Chemical methods and experiments have shown to not be very successful in controlling the population or stopping the increase. The blue tilapia are now considered a banned exotic species in Texas. Non-native fish are to not be released in local waterways, and if they are, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department needs to be contacted immediately. Jasmine, what about the island apple snail?
The island apple snails typically compete with the native species, and they prey on macrophytes, which are direct sources of food for the residents in the habitat. And they also act as a filter because they remove excess nutrients, and they kind of monitor the phytoplankton in the water. And without the ability to regulate the amount of algae, that can lead to algal bloom, which can lead to poor oxygen, poor water chemistry, and decreased diversity. Sarah, what about the economic impact?
So the main economic impact from the island apple snail is agricultural losses, specifically rice. There's not been any documented agricultural damages in Texas yet. However, the threat that they pose to rice farmers is very real. Already, rice farmers do have increased maintenance costs associated with the constant burrowing by the snails. And the island apple snail also carries a parasite, which is known as rat lungworm, which can infect humans. So, Deborah, what is the current research on the island apple snail?
So because the island apple snail does bring exotic parasites, early detection is very, very important to prevent the spreading, and like the blue tilapia, constantly monitoring the regional and local area is essential. So methods involving chemical treatments have proven to not be very successful, and the most effective method is the actual physical removal of the snail and the egg masses. So non-native species are not to be released, and if they are found, to please kill and freeze immediately and notify the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. So federal regulations as of April of 2006 does require that a permit is needed to transport freshwater and marine snails to help control the spread of the species. So Jasmine, what about the Asian tiger mosquito?
The Asian tiger mosquitoes are marked as being parasites, which means that they generally have a negative impact on the species that live in the ecosystem. The Asian tiger mosquito, as well as other types of mosquitoes, spread diseases such as the West Nile virus and the yellow fever, and they've been marked as biting anywhere from 30 to 48 organisms per hour, which means that at any given point, a pretty large, significant portion of the ecosystem has potentially been exposed to the virus. However, from the research that I did, the mosquitoes, there's a highly unlikely chance that the mosquitoes actually affect abiotic factors, but only because they typically deal with living organisms. So they target living organisms, and the viruses that they transfer and transmit only affect living organisms. Sarah, what can you tell us about the economic impact?
So the major way that Asian tiger mosquitoes can impact our economy are through any healthcare costs that are associated with disease transmission that may occur. They have a broad host range, which includes humans, domestic animals, wild animals, and birds. And they can also carry numerous diseases such as West Nile virus, yellow fever, and dog heartworm. They can potentially reduce tourism in areas where they're abundant, which could negatively affect local economies. So, Deborah, what can you tell us about the current research on the Asian tiger mosquito?
So because of the diseases that these mosquitoes do transmit, catching it early is really important, and having constant monitoring of the outdoor containers of standing water. For example, in your home, it would be the bird baths on a regular basis. So currently there's actually no continuing research on the Asian tiger mosquito, but the programs created are actually focused on how the mosquito spreads and how they're distributed. The experiments that are conducted focus on the disease aspect, collecting samples from the environment around them. We actually do have a better understanding of the mosquito and its ecology due to the federal agencies working together with scientists and universities. So that concludes our invasive animal species project. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.